Today I'd like us to talk about intervals. Here's the word interval. And in music it's a very important thing when we're learning how to read music, to understand how to recognize the different intervals, be able to see whether they're moving melodically or harmonically, and to be able to then play them accurately. It also helps to be able to hear them and be able to sing them as well. So an interval is just the space between two notes. And this can happen with the two notes happening at the same time. That's called harmonically. Or one note happening and then the next note, and that's called melodically, like in a melody. Now what that looks like when we're looking on the keyboard, and let me move the camera. So what we're going to do is look at the little ladybugs. I figured the ladybugs would help us to, they're very visible on the white keys, so you should hopefully be able to see. But basically we're talking about what happens when we go from one key to the next key. When we're counting an interval number, we always start with this as 1. So if I'm going from F to G, I'm going a step or a second. If I move this ladybug, right now we're just working with intervals that are moving up. Now I've gone up a third because I've gone from the first note, I've skipped the second note, and then I've landed on the third note. So visually this is a third on the keyboard. You can do this starting on any key. You can also think of it as going a third down. This is what a third on the black keys would look like. So this, the same concept works whether you're on white keys or black keys. There's a third. Sometimes when I'm teaching these, I think it's easier to focus on the white keys first and then apply it later. So this is going to be a fourth because I've gone from key number 1. C is going to be my first key, and then I'm going up from 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the common mistakes is that people will just start counting 1, 2, 3, and then they'll think it's a third instead of a fourth. Again, you need to count that first note when you're counting the intervals. Now, what does that look like if we're going to move that to the keyboard, or to the staff, I should say? And let's use our dry erase board staff here. And the way you can tell with the intervals, again, you need to make sure you start with the first note and count that as 1. That's going to be 1. If I'm going to go up a second or a step, I'm just going to go directly to the next note. And if you notice, what happens is I've gone from a space note to a line note. It's important to understand that, because if I see 2 space notes, I haven't gone a step because I've skipped over this one in between. So when we're moving by intervals, we have to be paying attention to the line space, line space, line space. If I'm going to go a fourth from that F, here's my 1, 2, 3, and then there's a fourth. And again, this works for if I'm doing them, I can go down a second just as easily as I can go up a second. So there's down a second. The other thing is, I said sometimes these can happen together at the same time. So for instance, I may have a third. Again, notice that I have the 2 space notes. That's my clue that I have a third. And these are being played what we would say harmonically, because they're being played together at the same time. I just dropped my dry erase marker, so I'll show you this done with another one. That's what it would look like if I stemmed them together. So these are called harmonic intervals, and these are called melodic intervals, where we're moving. Here we're moving up a third, down a third, up a fourth. These intervals help us to be able to read our music as we recognize these better. Notice that the odd numbered intervals, so a third, a fifth, and a seventh, are all what we'd say line to line or space to space. So if I'm doing a third, I'm going to do them harmonically just for space purposes. But notice that those are matching. We have a space and a space. If I'm going to do a fifth, let's start the fifth on E. If I'm going to do a fifth, notice that they're line to line. And let's do a seventh line to line as well. Notice how much space there is between those two line notes, but that's my clue that I'm dealing with a seventh. So that's a little bit of an introduction to intervals. And then what I'd like you to do is the next video, which will give you some practice using some flashcards. I'll flash you a flashcard, and then we'll figure out whether it's a second, third, fourth, fifth, that kind of thing.